We're going to talk about some hypocrisy that went into appointing Supreme Court justices during election years. And then we're going to talk about Supreme Court justices that lied under oath during their job interviews. And then we're going to talk about the one that refused to opine on whether the president could, and I got the exact scenario wrong, but it was about whether or not the president could delay elections indefinitely without anyone else's authority. And then we're also going to talk about gifts given to Supreme Court justices and whether or not it's legal to give gifts to Supreme Court justices. Actually, I don't even think I have a slide for that one, but remind me to talk about it. Um, and then we're going to talk about which justices get the most gifts and whether they're ruling on cases where they may not be objective because they're getting gifts from that person or being paid by them in some way, shape, or form. So, that said, let's first talk about the purpose of the Supreme Court. I think it's important from a grounding perspective. We like to talk about definitions in philosophy, and this community started in the philosophy area. So, the Supreme Court justice is the highest court in the country. The primary role is to interpret the Constitution and ensure that laws are applied fairly and consistently. So, as someone mentioned earlier, it's not about making up laws. The Supreme Court can't make laws. They can only say whether or not something is constitutional or not, and how should the laws be, how like what is fair based on the laws of the land. So they're interpreting the laws. So judicial review comes from Marbury versus Madison in 1803, where the court basically determines whether laws or government actions violate the U.S. Constitution, and it can strike down unconstitutional laws, executive orders, and lower court decisions. They're the final arbiter of the law, so they have the final say on legal disputes. There's nowhere else to go. If the Supreme Court disagrees with you, you're done in the United States. Um, and so its decisions are binding across all lower courts. So when they make a decision, all the lower courts have to follow that decision as a precedence. So it's very far reaching, and Supreme Court decisions are very influential. They craft and influence US law. Now it resolves conflicts between states, federal laws, and constitutional rights. It also interprets federal law and the Constitution, so it clarifies the meaning when laws are passed by Congress. And for those that don't know, the whole reason lobbyists exist, if you're very anti-lobbyist, I will say they exist for a reason. It's because without lobbyists, Congress would often pass laws that they had no idea how they were going to impact private enterprise. And so the idea of lobbyists is to help Congress better understand what impact a law will have on business because they don't want to destroy the economy from a law inadvertently. That was the original point of lobbyists. It's all changed, but about like, and that still does happen, but there's a lot of other stuff going on that's not very ethical. But we won't get into that tonight. We'll talk about lobbyists probably on another event. It also interprets constitutional rights like free speech, gun rights, and privacy. It's a check to the legislative branch, or at least it's supposed to be, which is Congress, and the executive branch, which is the president, to try to prevent abuses of power. However, there is no power to enforce its rulings. Enforcement is left to the executive branch. It settles major social and political issues on things like civil rights, abortion, voting rights, same-sex marriage, and it often rules on controversial national issues that Congress avoids or struggles to resolve. Now, some limitations on the court. As I said, it can't make laws, it cannot enforce its rulings, and justices are appointed for life. So once you're a Supreme Court justice, no one can get rid of you except if you are impeached, which has never successfully happened. Well, someone that was one justice was impeached in history, but he was not removed because the Senate has to agree to the removal with a two-thirds majority, and to get two-thirds senators to agree on anything is almost impossible. And so no one has ever been removed. There has been one justice that I will go into that left his position, and I'll talk about why. So the Supreme Court decisions impact at least millions of people. I think it's probably tens of millions or hundreds of millions and so the court's integrity and impartiality are crucial. If it becomes politically compromised, it threatens public trust in the legal system. Imagine not feeling like you're going to get a fair shake if someone unjustly sues you in a court and you feel like you know you didn't do anything wrong, but you're going to get in trouble anyway because that person has great political influence. That wouldn't be a good country to live in where that type of thing is happening. So, um, let's talk about a little bit of hypocrisy in election years. In 2016, Senate Republicans refused to consider President Obama's nominee, Merrick Garland, arguing that it was an election year. And they quoted something called the Biden rule, which says you're not supposed to seat a Supreme Court justice in an election year. Mind you, it was about 9 months before the presidential turnover, and so it was the presidential elections. And so it was almost a year, but apparently not enough from the Republicans' perspective. However, in 2020, when Donald Trump, a Republican, was president, they reversed course and they confirmed Amy Coney Barrett in just days before the election in a 30-day confirmation hearing, which was extremely fast. And so within 2 months of the presidential election, they did appoint a Supreme Court justice. So they went from can't seat a Supreme Court justice in an election year, 9 months before the election, to we're going to seat a Supreme Court justice in an election year 2 months before the presidential elections, which raises real problems around whether or not you can trust that group of people because they were clearly inconsistent. And the question is whether or not the judicial appointments are about following the law or whether or not it's about creating a political advantage. And so that seems to me to be unfair play. And someone who is hypocritical, which this is someone that I can't trust. And I don't think that voters should trust people who do those things either. And so my recommendation is don't vote for someone who's a hypocrite, because if they're a hypocrite, they'll do whatever's in their best interest, even if it's unethical. That includes screwing you over and me over. And well, let's be honest, we're the ones that get screwed over by the lawmakers more often than anyone else. They don't screw each other over. Let's put it that way. So, pardon my frank language, but so let's talk a little bit about people, justices who misled when they were under oath. Samuel Alito, who talked about Roe v. Wade, declined to say in 2006 that it was settled law, but he said it was an important precedent, protected, and he didn't say that it can't be reexamined, but he did say it's an important precedent to be protected. Now, Clarence Thomas basically said he has no reason or agenda to prejudge the issue or to predispose to rule one way or another on the issue of abortion. He claimed that he had never discussed or thought much about Roe v. Wade, despite having attended Yale Law School and worked in a government legal positions where abortion rights were a central legal issue. So, again, talking about someone who is not honest and therefore not trustworthy, he basically lied. There's no misconstruing that. To say that he never thought or discussed much about Roe v. Wade is absolutely impossible for the jobs that he was in. And when I say impossible, I mean 99% unlikely, because I don't think pretty much anything is impossible. That said, legal scholars and observers found the claim implausible as well and said that Roe was one of the most significant Supreme Court cases of the era. So, of course, he was talking about it. Justice Gorsuch said that a good judge will consider Roe a precedent of the U.S. Supreme Court worthy as treatment of precedents like any other. And he said that precedence means the court moves forward after it decides a case. He didn't say he wouldn't overturn Roe, but let's face it, if someone said that to you, would you assume that they're not going to overturn Roe? Probably you would, because that's what most people would assume. Like if someone said something like that, you would assume they would. Now, Brett Kavanaugh said he doesn't get to pick and choose which Supreme Court precedents he tries to follow. And so he said he follows them all and that Roe is an important precedent that has been reaffirmed many times. This language says very clearly to me, if I was listening to it from an honest person, that this person will not overturn Roe, but of course he voted to overturn Roe. Amy Coney Barrett said that she doesn't believe Roe is a super precedent that no one questions anymore. Super precedent just means that no one, that it should never be overturned. But she also said that does not mean that Roe should be overruled. So, but she was in a very different space of, different political environment than the others. So Barrett said that she would follow, although here she actually gets more specific. She said she would follow the law of stare decisis, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering the Latin. I never did learn Latin, even though I wanted to. But that's a legal precedence that should be honored. And she said that respect for court precedences, if abortion-related cases, she would respect that law if abortion-related cases came before her. And neither she nor Kavanaugh expressly said that they would not vote to overturn Roe, but didn't they both clearly imply that they would not? If you say you're going to follow the precedents when an abortion-related case comes before you and you don't follow the precedents, well, that sounds quite a bit like a lie to me. So, a lot of people try to bat around the bush and say, no, they didn't really lie technically. Well, if you were talking to a good friend and well, let's say as a parent, suppose you're a parent and you're looking at the cookie jar, it looks a little emptier than you expected. You didn't give your child permission to have a cookie, so you say, "Did you eat a cookie?" And your child says, "I wouldn't eat a cookie without your permission." Did they lie? If they ate the cookies, they didn't lie technically, but come on, let's be honest as a parent. If you catch your child with cookie crumbs and you know that they actually did eat the cookies, you're going to basically treat them like they lied. But technically, they only said, I wouldn't eat a cookie without your permission. And they could say, unless I felt like eating a cookie really badly, and maybe they did. So technically, they were still honest when they ate the cookies because there was some condition under which, they would eat the cookie. They just said generally they wouldn't eat the cookie without your permission. So the truth is, if your child did that, would you trust them with access to the cookie jar again? Well, I wouldn't. Like, now I'm pretty liberal with my kids, so they get to eat the cookies that they want and they're within reach, and I don't care. But let's be honest, if someone says that kind of thing to you and then goes around and does the opposite, I treat it as a lie because that's to me what it is. So, So let's talk a little bit more about Brett Kavanaugh's controversial confirmation hearing. So there was the issue of his high school yearbook entries, which, given that's a long time to go back, but let's talk about the examples. There were references that potentially could have led to inappropriate behavior. Look, we were all kids once and made mistakes. That's not even the part that bothers me. I wouldn't care about any of this stuff if he was just honest about it. But unfortunately, under oath, which by the way, lying under oath is a felony. So he called boofing, he said that boofing referred to flatulence. But actually, the term boofing, when it was researched, there was no historical use of the word boofing to mean flatulence in slang dictionaries, pop cultures, or other sources from the 1980s. And in fact, 1983 Georgetown Prep yearbook, someone else mentioned the word boofing alongside references to heavy drinking and partying, which is more aligned with its definition related to substance abuse than flatulence. So the flatulence thing, clearly a lie, and he lied under oath. So that's lie number one. Oh, by the way, this is a little bit much, but I will say the term it's basically anal ingestion of alcohol and drugs. So it's not like your typical just smoking a joint type of thing. It's like what like that's quite the thing to put in your yearbook. So I don't normally like judge people for what they did as kids, but there's a certain level of like, wow. Um Next is the Devil's Triangle. He said the Devil's Triangle was a drinking game, but the
My
term has
God.
long been associated with um, a, a sexual threesome involving two men and one woman. His definition was widely disputed, and when I researched it, it turns out there were no references to Devil's Triangle being a drinking game prior to his confirmation hearing. Interestingly, an anonymous Wikipedia entry after his hearing tried to add the alleged definition that he used, which was a clear attempt to cover up his lie. And so now he's not only lying under oath, but someone's trying to cover up the fact that he lied under oath. Now, there's another comment called Renate alumni, and there are several Georgetown prep classmates that used that, including Kavanaugh. And Kavanaugh claimed that it was a tribute to their friendship with a female classmate. Unfortunately for him, said classmate said that she and others felt it was misogynistic reference implying sexual conquest, which she denied ever happened. So if Renate was such a good friend, why would she say that? Look, we all have falling outs with friends, but that's pretty big turnaround from someone who was a good friend to someone who would call the comment a misogynistic reference implying sexual conquest. So if she was honest, then he not only lied about what the reference meant, he lied about having sex with her in the first place. So doubling down on the lie. So interesting. Next is heavy drinking. Kavanaugh downplayed his high school and college drinking habits despite multiple multiple former classmates stating that he drank heavily. He asserted that he never blacked out from drinking and was contradicted by several reports, which seems like yet another lie from Kavanaugh. And in fact, critics argue that he misrepresented or outright lied about his past behavior. So there was one case. Well, I'll get to that in another slide. The drinking will come up again. So Kavanaugh regularly asks people in his court to submit to a polygraph because they're actually, if you haven't tried to train yourself to pass a polygraph, the polygraph has been shown to be 80 to 85% accurate for people who have not tried to game the system. Now, I have a reference in here for my research on that. While Ford, who accused him of sexually assaulting her, submitted to a polygraph and passed it, saying that she was being honest. Kavanaugh refused to do so, even though he recommends them in his court, which is a little interesting, isn't it? Again, a little note of hypocrisy. If he wanted to clear himself, he could have had himself and his friend, who actually was supposedly a witness of the attempted sexual assault, to both submit to a polygraph. And guess what? The math gets very interesting because even assuming the worst scenario where it's only 80% accurate for untrained people, if two people's polygraphs agree, that means based on the way the math works, there's only a 4% chance that both of them are wrong. If three agree, then there's a 0.8% chance that all three are wrong. So I'd argue that 4% is actually pretty good given that 10% of the cases appealed result in some form of reversal or retrial. So 4% chance of inaccuracy just based on the polygraph alone is doing better than the entire justice system. All of the workings of the justice system are now improved on by just taking two polygraphs. So seems like the polygraph would have been a good idea. I would have recommended that the court actually like force him to take a polygraph and force his friend to take a
Yep.
polygraph, and we all would have seen what the truth was. If all three of them agreed, it was almost certain what happened. Amy Klobuchar, and I'm sorry if I'm butchering her name. I don't watch how it's pronounced on the news very much. Asked Kavanaugh, "Have you ever blacked out from drinking?" He responded back very aggressively, "I don't know. Have you?" Like very aggressively. You got to watch the tape. It's like, imagine that you ever did that in any job interview you were ever in your entire life, which is really what a confirmation hearing is. It's like a job interview. And he was so disrespectful. He did later apologize for that. But should we be putting someone on the highest court in the land that responds that way to a question like that? Because the reason that they asked is maybe he sexually assaulted her, but blacked out and forgot about it because he didn't remember. And if you drink too much, you will forget about things. That's just how it works. And if you drank so much that you blacked out, that very well could have happened. So, and he also, if you've ever blacked out, you would know that you find yourself a little disoriented about how you ended up where you were when you wake up. And it's very clear if you black out um, from drinking that you did black out from drinking and you know that you did. And if you've never done it, then you would never have that sense of disorientation. So you would know that you've never blacked out. The fact that he responded, "I don't know," is immediately dishonest because he has to know. Because if he's at least talked to one person who's blacked out and what it was like, which I obviously have, then you know the difference. You know whether or not you have. It's not something in question. But he said he doesn't know. So that was a clear other lie. So it's also pretty clear that friends told him that he had blacked out from drinking too, because friends have made very clear that he drank heavily. So um, next, Clarence Thomas confirmation hearings, denials of sexual harassment allegations towards Anita Hill. She testified under oath that Thomas made repeated inappropriate sexual remarks to her, including references to pornography and crude discussions about sex. He categorically denied all allegations, saying it was a high-tech lynching, quote unquote. So playing the race card. Several other women were willing to testify about similar behavior from Thomas, but they were not called to the stand by the Senate Judiciary Committee. And I didn't research, but we can guess which political party the Senate Judiciary Committee was run by at that time. And it was the same party that Thomas was being appointed by. Now, the FBI's initial report on Hill's claims also included supporting evidence. The Senate still confirmed Thomas in spite of all this. Next is that he was dishonest about the interest in pornography because he basically later witnesses and reports suggested that he had a strong interest in pornography at the time. There were also misleading statements about his work at the EEOC. He downplayed his role in certain controversial decisions and policies at the EEOC, particularly regarding civil rights enforcement. Former colleagues later suggested he was more involved in policymaking than he let on in the confirmation hearings. He also played down his conservative political ideology during his hearings, presenting himself as having no strong political ideological leanings. Well, and that he emphasized fairness and independence. But if you look at his Supreme Court record, he is one of the most conservative justices on the entire Supreme Court, which raises issues about whether or not he misrepresented his views to gain confirmation. I have no doubts that he very much did because there's just too many things. And remember, the rule with statistics is if there's something that has a low likelihood of being true, and there are four things that each have a low likelihood of being true, the chance that all of them are false is almost impossible. It's infinitesimally small, which is what I was explaining. And the interesting thing is courts don't know number theory, right? I was a computer scientist. I had to take number theory, and that's why I know this about statistics. But statistics aren't really taught to most people. And so people don't realize these things, but the chance that all four of these things were actually not true is near zero. So, at least one of them's true. Potentially all four of them are true, and we should be concerned about any one of them being true. Next, a little bit more about a Supreme Court justice. There was a Justice Fortas, Abe Fortas, and he accepted a $20,000 retainer from a financier, Lewis Wolfson, in 1966. The modern day equivalent of that $20,000 would be $162,000. There was also a promise of annual payments for life. Wolfson was under investigation for securities violations at the time. A couple of important notes. First of all, Justice Fortas recused himself from the case ultimately, but he did privately advise the White House on Wolfson's request for clemency, which raised concerns about conflicts of interest. He also returned all the money he was given, and he resigned in 1969 because of this issue, and he was the only justice to resign under ethical controversy ever. Now, let's look at gifts. We talked about someone who resigned voluntarily and gave back a $160,000 gift. Mr. Thomas has accepted almost $5 million worth of gifts, about a large percentage which, and it's not disclosed exactly, but a large percentage of which are from billionaire and Republican donor Harlan Crow over 2 decades. Crow has been involved in funding many conservative causes and organizations that have filed amicus briefs before the Supreme Court. And guess who did not recuse himself? 3 guesses? Oh, just 1 guess. Okay, we know. So let's talk about Samuel Alito. And don't worry, we'll get to the Democrats. There's a rotten Democrat in the bunch too. She's not terrible, but not I don't think she should still be on the Supreme Court either, just like I don't think these guys should. So Justice Alito accepted a luxury fishing trip to Alaska, traveling on a private jet owned by billionaire Paul Singer. Singer's hedge fund had multiple cases before the Supreme Court. Alito did not recuse himself from these cases. That's at least $200,000 worth of gifts that he received from someone who he sat in court on ruling about. So you can't be objective when someone's giving you a $200,000 gift. It just doesn't work that way. Historically, people have recused themselves from these types of things. And in fact, we'll talk about another justice who recused herself from huge numbers of things just because of any potential conflict of interest. And we'll get to that. Recusing should be the norm, but it is not, as we can see. Then let's talk about Neil Gorsuch. Shortly after his 2017 confirmation, Justice Gorsuch sold a property to Brian Duffy, the CEO of a law firm, Greenberg Traurig, that's tough to pronounce, which frequently has cases before the court. Gorsuch did not disclose the buyer's identity in his financial reports, which, by the way, several of the other um, gifts were not originally disclosed, and I forgot to go into exactly which ones were and were not that I found in the research. Sorry for that, but definitely feel free to look at the notes and you can look it up yourself with ChatGPT. It will tell you whose things were originally disclosed and not. Pretty sure most of the ones that I've gone through were not originally disclosed. Now, Gorsuch earned between $250,000 and $500,000 from the sale, um, and the house was on the market for 2 years before it was sold to this guy. So clearly, it wasn't selling and he sold it and got his share. He also earned $555,000 from book deals by Random House, and he did not recuse himself from cases involving Penguin. And he's not the only one. We'll get to that. So in fact, here we are. Here we are. So Stephen Breyer earned $700,000 from Penguin Random House, but when they had cases in front of the court, he voluntarily recused himself. He earned that $700,000 through book deals, perfectly legitimate business dealings, and he said, "Look, I've been paid by these people, so it still doesn't feel right that I'm gonna, be a part of the court in their cases, even though he earned the money fair and square. It wasn't gifts; it was through the free markets that he earned it." Now, Justice Sonia Sotomayor, whom I've seen a lot of good things from, but this is one that I'm not so happy about. She earned $1.175 million advance for her memoir My Beloved World, published in 2013. The income was publicly disclosed and considered permissible under judicial ethical rules, but it pertains to compensation because it's personal writing that she wrote about. But she did not recuse herself from cases involving Penguin Random House. Um, I don't think that's appropriate. I think she should have gotten a stern warning from the Chief Justice, which is the person who should be sort of pointing these things out to justices if they're not pointing it out voluntarily. And I'll talk more about him in a minute. Next is Justice Elena Kagan. Justice Kagan was appointed by President Obama. She's received income from teaching institutions like Harvard Law School. While specific amounts vary annually, such compensation is generally disclosed and allowed under judicial guidelines. And I was not able to find any cases that came under the court from people who gave her gifts, but she did recuse herself from 28 out of 78 cases during her first term just because of potential bias from her prior role as Solicitor General, which says she's perfectly willing to recuse herself if there's any doubt that she will or will not be objective. Whereas apparently giving $2.5 million gifts, oh, I can be perfectly objective with that, right? That's what Mr. Thomas thinks. So I don't know that he's so objective when he gets those kinds of gifts. So next is let's do a quick summary of the different justices, and then now I'm going to reveal the parties that they're a part of if you didn't already know. Two justices that got the most gifts did not recuse themselves. Out of the three that earned money from commerce from people whose cases were in front of the Supreme Court, one of two Democrats recused themselves, and none of the Republicans did. Um, from any of the cases where they had a financial interest. I'd argue all of those who didn't recuse themselves should, if it happened more than once, should be removed from the court. They should get a warning the first time, and then if they do it again, they get removed from the court. And it should be clear after the first time that if they do it again, they'll be removed from the court. Now, we'll talk more about removing people from the court later. So, Supreme Court Code of Conduct. So it wasn't until November 13th, 2023, after most of what I just described had already happened, that the Supreme Court was under a lot of pressure to create a code of conduct. In fact, they really resisted that code of conduct very fiercely. They didn't want to have a code of conduct, but they knew it looked really bad that the highest court in the land didn't have a code of conduct, so they did create one. First is upholding integrity and independence. Justices should maintain high standards to preserve the judiciary's integrity and independence, avoid impropriety and its appearance. They should avoid both in all activities, including personal and professional, that means. Fair, impartial, and diligent performance of duties. Justices are expected to perform their daily duties impartially and diligently. Engagement in extrajudicial activities. Participation in activities outside their judicial duties is permissible if consistent with their obligations. Refraining from political activity, justices should abstain from political activities. While this code formalizes ethical guidelines, it's been criticized because there's no enforcement mechanism, which is probably why no one vehemently opposed it, because it actually sounds pretty good, right? Like if all these guys actually followed this, I'd be on board. I like it. I think it sounds pretty good. I didn't try to make sure it was bulletproof, but it sounds pretty good at the high level. But hopefully we all agree that more than half of the court has already violated these, right? And yet none of them have been removed. The problem is there's no enforcement mechanism. So that's one of the things that needs to be fixed, in my opinion. Um, and Next, I want to go into public trust in the court, which was a big part of what I talked about in, give me one second. In the outline is public trust in the court has gone downhill. In fact, before the 1990s, there was over 65% of people approved of the Supreme Court and less than 35% disapproved. Now we have, and actually the in 2001, it got even worse. Over 50% of people, um, I think it was 2001, but basically there was a point at which over 50% of people disapproved of the court and 49%, I believe, approved of it. But now the disapprovals are higher than the approvals. And so I started trying to dig into this, and I'm like, are there any trends that I can figure out? I did notice when I did the analysis, the Republicans seemed more often guilty than the Democrats. So I said, I wonder if there's a correlation between the majority of Democrats versus Republicans on the history. To do that, I had to go further back than 40 years. I wanted to look at 80 years because it's been a long time since the Democrats had a majority on the in the Supreme Court. Now, what I'm going to explain here is this bottom two is the number of in blue Democrats and in red number of Republicans on the Supreme Court. And then here in green, we have the number of citizens that approve of the court. And then in black, we have the number that disapprove. Well, you'll notice that there's a correlation here between um, the number of Supreme Court justices being a majority Republican and that downtrend in approvals and the uptrend in disapprovals. Now, look, I'm not a Democrat. I'm an independent, but I think that it's important to look at the trends and say, look, this doesn't mean don't ever vote Republican. It means let's be worried about what the current, and even the Republicans for the last 40 years have been doing on the Supreme Court that's bringing this level of scrutiny and this level of dissatisfaction with the job that the Supreme Court is doing. And obviously, we don't vote for who's in the Supreme Court. We vote for the politicians who appoint them. So we should be doing some soul searching about who we're choosing in the Republican Party to take leadership to appoint these people and create this level of uh, concern about our highest court in the land. So, is the Supreme Court legitimate? Well, let's do a summary, justice by justice. Clarence Thomas, almost 5 million of undisclosed bribes, ruled on cases of people who bribed him, likely sexually harassed people during his career, lied under oath during the confirmation hearing. Alito, Republicans appointed him in 2006. Over $200,000 of initially undisclosed bribes, did not recuse himself from cases of the person who bribed him. Brett Kavanaugh, evidence he was a sex offender, drug and alcohol abuser when younger, lied under oath about these things. And then Justice Sonia Sotomayor. This one's the Democrat. The first three were Republicans. She received over $700,000 of income from Penguin and did not recuse herself from the cases. Justice Neil Gorsuch, over $500,000 of book sales revenue, book sales revenue from Penguin and did not recuse himself from their cases. Justice Amy Cloney Barrett, appointed in an election year after Republicans said nobody should be appointed in an election year. We talked about that. She lied on her stance in Roe v. Wade, which we talked about. And when she was asked whether or not the president could unilaterally delay an election under any circumstances, she said she'd have to look into the arguments. And she didn't want to become a political pundit, and she felt answering that question made her a political pundit. Actually, I would argue, Amy, not answering that question makes you a political pundit. So it seems clear to me that this should not be a political question, whether or not the president gets to unilaterally decide, well, we're just going to delay elections because I'd rather stay in power. And I'm not going to tell you when we'll have the next elections. We're just going to delay them for a while. Just don't hold your breath. So that should not be okay. That it should not be a political question at all. The fact that she's claiming that it is a political question is very, very concerning to me. No one should think that's a political question. Whether you're a Republican or a Democrat, it doesn't matter. That question should not be a political question. So, Justice John Roberts is leading the court. He's the Chief Justice, and there are unprecedented ethical scandals, and he has not strongly advocated for those committing them to step down. He should have. And if you're concerned about the weight of the court, tell them to step down during the cycle of the person who appointed them. But make them step down. Don't allow these people to continue to work on the highest court in the land. It doesn't make sense. Now, Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson has no evidence of scandals to date. She was just appointed in 2022, so she has time. But hopefully she doesn't have scandals. I would like there to be less on the Supreme Court. She was appointed by the Democrats, or a Democrat, nominated by a Democrat. And then here's my favorite one is Justice Elena Kagan. She's not only had no scandals, she's been advocating for an enforcement mechanism for the Supreme Court's ethics code. So that's what we need on the Supreme Court. People who say that the people who aren't just on the Supreme Court should be punished. So keep in mind, the only justice to resign from the Supreme Court based on ethics was one that did so based on $160,000 modern day US dollar in gifts. And he recused himself and still resigned. Now we have people getting millions in gifts, not recusing themselves, not resigning, and there's no impeachment. And yes, the justice can be impeached, but like I said, that's very hard. It basically seems to me that more than half of the Supreme Court has lost its integrity. While most are Republicans, one Democrat has also been unethical, in my opinion. Sotomayor has also been unethical because she absolutely should have recused herself from the Penguin cases. Why should she not? She's getting paid by them in large amounts, so she should, recuse herself. So is the Supreme Court legitimate? I don't think so. Are they, putting us into Banana Republic territory day after day? Not necessarily, right? There was a lawsuit that I saw in, this was pretty interesting. I don't remember which country, but it was, I won't even mention the continent, but you'll get a sense. Basically, a guy got removed from a WhatsApp group, and the court mandated that he must be added back into the WhatsApp group. It's like, wait a minute, is this really what your justice system is focused on? So we're not at that level, but so it could get worse. So proposed solutions. I want stronger ethical rules for all justices at all levels of government, with the strictest being at the Supreme Court level, and an enforcement mechanism, perhaps a court to try Supreme Court justices. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that a little later in the next slide. I want greater transparency on financial gifts and conflicts of interest, and a penalty if they go in front of the Supreme Court's automatically if it's found that they didn't report a significant gift. Many we discussed did not. Violating the ethical rules should result in an end to the justice's tenure, including retroactively based on past gifts on the Supreme Court. I may be the first to propose this, but I actually think that that court to try Supreme Court justices should be made up of a jury of average citizens. And I think, the right to a just and speedy trial in front of a jury of peers is a really powerful thing. And I think that the average American would actually be better positioned. And I don't think anyone would blink about the things that I said tonight if they were an average citizen sitting in front of these Supreme Court justices and they had to decide which of these people, were guilty. I don't think there would be a big revolution about, or a disagreement about who's guilty of doing things that are wrong. Now, next, we really need to stop the partisan actions. Defending bad actors for your party's sake is just not a good idea. You have to be willing to choose fairness over the party's agenda. Because if your party's not fair, why are you supporting them in the first place? As human beings, we all want to be treated fairly. So shouldn't we make sure those we support are being fair in the first place? If they're not being fair, then how can we assure ourselves that we'll be treated fairly? So really, we should be choosing fairness over party agenda. And unfortunately, a lot of people are not. Basically, there are a lot of unethical tactics being used for political goals, and I talked about a bunch of them tonight, but basically, whether we're a Democrat or Republican, we should be trying to be our best self to seek truth and to be fair, which is the FTI's North Star first intention. We have five intentions in the FTI that we strive for. And the one that guides us is to be our best self, to seek truth and to be fair. And if we could all just agree on that before party and say, look, let's unite as a tribe, and we're going to talk about tribalism another day, and I'm going to invite you all to be a member of the FTI tribe. If we can unite on being our best self, seeking truth and being fair, regardless of party, I think both sides, Republicans and Democrats, have a lot to learn from each other. And I would love for us to have peaceful, polite conversations to learn from each other
It's good.
instead of this fighting with each other all the time and you're wrong and I'm right and this is why. Much better to listen to understand. And I would love to have that happening within the FTI umbrella. So that said, I'm going to ask a couple of uh, oh, and I would also say that if we don't try to be our best self, seek truth, and be fair, we'll definitely answer to our peers. But if my argument defending karma is right, if you haven't seen that, you can look at our FTI YouTube channel. And I have a pretty good logical argument that we will also answer to a higher power, whether it's in this life or after. So that said, I'm going to go to a couple of questions that I'll just seed with that, if any of you want to venture to answer or talk about, in and raise your hand, yeah, feel free to raise your hands and I'll call on people in the order. I'm going to give a quick intro into the conversation portion. But first is, should those in the highest court in the land have no ethical standards? If we agree that those standards should be there, should they be at risk of losing their job if they don't follow their own ethical code? And if a Supreme Court justice committed a crime, should they lose their job? Lying under oath, by the way, is a felony. So all the ones that lied under oath, they've already committed a crime, even though they haven't been prosecuted. But I think they should be prosecuted, shown to be guilty, and then once they've been shown to be guilty, then we should decide, should a Supreme Court justice guilty of a felony still be on the Supreme Court? So those are my questions. And with that said, I'm going to kind of explain how the next portion of the evening will go for those that are new. Limit comments or questions to one comment or question at a time. Limit the length to 2 or 3 minutes. If you want to respond to what someone just said, whether it's me or them, just jump in after the person finishes talking. Just keep comments like that are jumping in to less than 20 seconds and make sure they're a reply to what was just said so that we're not introducing a new topic. If you want to introduce a new topic, comment, or question, raise your hand and then you'll be able to introduce topics. We'll have time for everybody's questions tonight. We usually have time for everybody that wants to get a chance. And by the way, I am not able to follow the chat. I see people sent me DMs and stuff. Um, and uh, so if let me go to Ginny first.
Garrett, I just want to say this presentation was absolutely amazing. Thank you so much. It was so educational, and I really want you to run for president. You need to.
Very
Okay?
kind of you, Ginny.
That's my
Thank you.
comment. All righty.
Abe, how are you?
Right, well, good presentation, Garrett.
Thank you. Good to see you, Abe. or hear you.
Garrett, I'm a pessimist.
I know you are, Abe, but I always like your
Okay.
pessimism. It makes us think harder.
Okay, when I look at the whole thing, I
Uh-huh.
think there's more of corporate interest in who we elect as our senators. Because there was a rule, I think, called Citizens United,
Yep.
which, corporate interests could just flood the market with as much money as they can.
Yes.
The people who are being elected are not being elected by us, it's by the corporations.
Yep.
And we are in that situation because of that reason. I mean, even today. I mean, they're not interested in the common man. They're interested in billionaires and what they corporate interests. And I don't think there's going to be a solution for all what you have put in your entire presentation unless that is taken care of. Because I don't think any of the justices are bothered about it as long as they, uh, I mean, the corporate interests are addressed, not anything else. So that's my pessimism.
I'm just doing a quick fact check for myself before I say something. Um, so technically, the I'm gonna have to look more into that one. Oh, basically, I wanted to talk about dark money in the judiciary because it does exist, and you're absolutely right, Abe, that Citizens United is my number one priority because now we are allowed to give money to politicians, to judges, to people at all levels of government in exchange for favors. And if we say, oh, if you do this, I'll be very appreciative, and I might well even reward you, but you can't promise to reward them, but you can hint at it. And then they do me a favor. Well, say they give me a $500 million tax break. Well, then I could give them $100 million, technically, according to the Supreme Court's McDonnell versus United States in 2016, or no, Snyder versus United States. That would just be a gratuity, and it's not bribery. So unfortunately, bribery is mostly legal now. Citizens United was the start, and surprise, surprise, it was these Supreme Court justices that have been taking bribes that have been, making these things legal. Because the conservative majority basically says money should buy power, and so that's what they're legalizing is that money does buy power, which basically disenfranchises all of us that are not billionaires. Now, I hope to be someday, but I'm not yet. And I'm guessing no one else on this call is a billionaire yet. So we should all be concerned about it. And a billionaire with a conscience that believes in karma should also be concerned about it because they may be surprised, they may be impoverished in their next life and have to live under Rawls' veil, which we talked about last week. So, next question is for Tim.
Hello, Garrett. Nice presentation. Thank you for that. I I feel little like Abe, that we're picking out one unique feature of the government while there are many corrupt places. I think you would have to start with the Congress first. I mean, Congress has been caught many times with their hand in the cookie jar in a number of different ways. So you're not going to get the court to be more cleaner if the Congress isn't clean, because obviously they're the people that elect the court. I also feel that money doesn't necessarily wipe out your vote, but it does make it harder to make your vote count because obviously everybody runs on money, ads, websites, etc. All take money to do that. However, people still get elected that don't use a tremendous amount of money to get elected. So there are many people who run very lean campaigns and still get elected. So I would say that should make people a little more engaged. Just remember those. But yes, the money is the factor. You are not going to remove money from the situation, though, because both sides of the aisle, yeah, they've put some false things out there saying, look, we're cleaning up, but then they've allowed more dark money or bigger contributions from unknown people, the PACs, etc. So I don't think we are going to clean that up anytime soon.
Well,
Thank you.
I see you're a pessimist, Tim, but I'm an optimist. I think we can clean it up, but only if we start voting for people who want to clean it up. We do still have the right to vote as long as we get a chance to vote in midterm elections, and the next presidential election. And I'll withhold judgment until we do, but I'm going to assume we will, until otherwise proven differently. And if we do get a chance to vote in the midterm elections and the next presidential election, then I'm going to say, look, we can vote with our consciences and we can vote for who's fair and vote out of power all the people who have put into place. And this requires work. It requires an educated citizenry and it requires critical thinking skills. Is to look up whether or not your congresspeople are doing the right thing. Are they being ethical? Are they putting into place people that we want to be leaders? And if they're not, vote for someone else. As long as the other person is not like an even more unethical person, right? And you have to look at that too. And Tim, I hear you about both sides using dark money, but you can't really expect either side to not use dark money at all because that's like telling, Muhammad Ali to go up against another boxer, but with one hand tied behind his back. Like he might be the best, but you know what? With one hand tied behind his back, he's not going to be the best. So the truth is, there's only been one party that's legalized bribery, and that was the Republican Supreme Court appointed Supreme Court justices. It was a party line decision, and one in which Ruth Bader Ginsburg actually wrote a very historic response to where it was literally like the first time since the country's founding that the dissenting opinion did not say, I respectfully dissent. She simply said, I dissent, which was a very polite way of saying, put your expletive here. And so it was a very polite way of doing it, but in the Supreme Court world, that was a big expletive to the people in the majority opinion. So I do think you have to look for which parties are condoning and creating the laws. You can't throw the baby out with the bathwater and say, well, they're both following the laws now as they've been interpreted. You have to say, well, which one is being more fair and more ethical? Because we right now only have two choices. But if you're really smart, you're going to tell your state to get forced choice rank voting, basically where you vote for a priority of number one, number two, number three, so we can get a third party candidate in that comes from a different political party. That's really the way that I think this can be solved the best is by having another, a third party candidate have a chance at winning the presidency. And if a state says that it does forced rank voting, and all the states' votes go to whoever wins the forced rank voting, if enough states do that and all the states do that, then suddenly we can have third party candidates. It's not just Democrats and Republicans. And I agree both parties are bad, but I have seen in my research one much worse than the other.
Yeah, I agree with you on the third party. I don't agree that the Democrats are cleaner than the Republicans.
Well, I would love your sources. I would love your sources looking objectively at Democratic, because I just did one tonight, right? And I hope it was clear that the Democrats were cleaner on the Supreme Court. Do you disagree with my findings there?
I haven't looked at it from the Supreme Court angle specifically, so
Give
I
it a
am
shot. Give it a shot and tell me if I'm wrong. And I'm open to being wrong. I like to say when you admit you're wrong with good judgment, you're immediately right again. You're only ever truly wrong when it's clear that you're wrong and you refuse to admit it. And so let's both keep an open mind that the other one might have something to teach us and take a look at, I'm going to put the presentation in the chat now. Let me
By
see.
the way, I have something to say.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. it's clear to me that, getting elected these days necessarily requires a lot of money. Okay. And you have to yell the loudest to be heard. And if you have deep pockets, you'll yell very loud.
Mhm.
And those are the guys who actually have the backing, the big money backing, and they will win. Okay. So it'd be sort of, you know, for me, just being pragmatic. I don't think, the guys who are sort of populist types of messages are gonna win because they will not get the money to go against the big money guys. So I think this is a stuck.
So
Okay, in my
Munib,
opinion.
I definitely hear what you're saying, but I researched that, and it actually turns out that money is not enough to win elections. I forget what it was. I think it was like Jeb Bush like outspent his competitors like 5 to 1 or something like that, and he still lost because no one liked him. And what are you gonna do? No one liked him, so he didn't win, even though he outspent something like 5 to 1. I don't know the exact number because my memory is one of my worst attributes, but money does not always help you win. It doesn't always make you win. It always helps you be more likely to win, but we still have the power of democracy in our hands. And if we spread information and we spread truth with each other, we still have a chance at saving our democracy right now. That chance may not be around much longer, and so we damn well better take it while we have it. So that said, if anyone else has comments on that, jump in. Otherwise, I
Yes.
will let Jeff go
Garrett,
ahead.
can I say
Yeah, go
Oh,
ahead,
I have
Abe.
a
something?
comment too after you, Abe.
And as I understand it, Eric Garrett, very quickly, as I understand it, Trump actually made money from campaigning. I mean, am I if I correct?
Well, Trump made money from bankruptcies, so you might be right. I didn't research that, so I can't tell definitively. But let's let Abe share his opinion. And
Garrett, I mean, I think money does play an important part.
oh, I
Like,
didn't say it doesn't. I didn't say it doesn't. I'm just saying it's not the only factor.
yeah, because I mean, I'm not a Republican, neither am I a Democrat. I'm more of an independent.
Yep.
And I liked all the ideas of Bernie Sanders,
Yep.
but I don't think his candidature was, viable. I liked all what Jill Stein said. She spoke the right things, but she didn't have the money to back her up. I mean, she talked about things which I value a lot. Stop all these wars. Let's start taking all the money and spending it within our country and things like that. But she didn't pander to the corporate interest. She didn't have a chance.
Well, she was a third party candidate, so she didn't
She was
have a
a
chance.
third party candidate,
Yeah.
yes.
She didn't have a
But,
chance. There was no way Jill was going to win. Like it was, she knew that. And so, her spending didn't matter because without force rank voting, she had no chance. With force rank voting, it would totally change the calculus. She would have a chance.
and I don't think it's going to happen in future. Like, it's going to be these two parties and they're going to be corporate interest and both these parties. I mean, I find so much of corruption in,
Yeah.
the people whom we elected from Nancy Pelosi to all these people doing this insider trading and all this
Yep.
nonsense. And we as citizens just can't do anything. We just are spectators. And
Right.
all these people, when they come every 4 years, they pander to all our,
Well,
to our,
we can do something. We can get out and vote for the people who are ethical, and we have that power still, I hope. And if we vote for the people who are ethical, we'll win. But if Abe, you say, you know what, it's a foregone conclusion that my vote doesn't matter, and you choose not to vote, guess what? Then it's going to be a foregone conclusion because if enough people give up, then yeah, the bad guys win. And there was a great famous quote, I'm going to paraphrase it, which is, this is more to encourage you to run for office, Abe, but basically if the man who doesn't run for a political position and choose it, or I forget what it was, and maybe someone will correct me on the quote, but it's something like the man who doesn't become a leader or run for a political office, um it like leaves it to lesser men to do it, basically becomes a slave to the lesser man or whatever. It's like something like, you have to be the change you want to see happen in the world. And if you don't fight your hardest to make the world a better place, you have no one to blame when it becomes worse but yourself, because a lot of other people made that same decision, and you got to get people animated and motivated to do something about it, do the best you can at making it better, join the FTI as a member, and we're trying to make it better as a group. So that's one thing that I can suggest to you. And by the way, I'm very bad at self-promotion. So let me take a quick moment and put a link in for people to learn more about the FTI. And then George wanted to say something too. Thank you, Abe.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Abe that money is a huge factor, but I think that like in the two-party system that we have, most of the money comes from donations from, lots of people to each party, and they'll have their interests to prop up and elect their candidates. If that makes any sense.
Yeah, I mean, some people get more money from big donors and others get them from the average person. Bernie Sanders actually was the only politician running for president that did not use Citizens United money. He had no PAC money. It was all small donations from individual donors. So that was very unusual.
I
But
think because a lot of people believed his message.
yeah, I agree. I think there was a large percentage of people that believed in his message, and I think it's because it was a very ethical message. Like Abe, I'm an independent, but I really liked what Bernie had to say. And then I liked it even more after I fact
Look,
checked the fiscal
he lost,
responsibility of his
but he
message.
lost.
What's
Bernie
that?
lost.
DNC screwed him over.
Well, he lost. Well, the DNC did screw him over, but he still would have lost either way. But you also have to remember, Munib, he lost, but he lost because the Democrats didn't get behind him and support him. If they were smart, and they lost the election because they didn't do that. If they'd gotten behind him, there's no way he wouldn't have won. Like if the Democrats had said, "We want Bernie to be our candidate instead of Hillary," then Hillary wouldn't, Bernie would have beat Trump, in my opinion. So I think he had a much more populist message. Trump's appeal is populism. Well, Bernie is also a populist. He's just a populist on the other side of the aisle. So it would have been very interesting, let's put it that way, to see Bernie versus Trump. I think Bernie would have won, but
Right.
we don't really know. So that
If I could
said,
make
go ahead, George.
one more. So we talk a lot about the money being a problem. I guess a question for the group here is what steps can we take to eliminate that factor? Because it sounds like with how deep this is, it's like we have to completely restructure the system to get this corrupt dark money out of the system. So I guess, yeah, question for the group.
Exactly. It has to be a campaign finance reform, serious reform, campaign financing.
I
Right,
agree.
but how do
I
you
don't
do
think
that?
the Congress and the Senate will go for it because they're all
Right.
in there because of this, big money. But what this country needs is serious campaign, reform, financing reform.
Yeah, I
Get the
agree.
money out of politics.
Yeah,
I
I
I
agree
think
100%.
I
Go
think
ahead.
campaigning should be only public funded. I think it should be free. So money is not involved at all. It's just the issues. I thought that for most of my life.
Big
I
money is
think
always attached to an outcome. Like
Well,
we need to eliminate that.
yeah. So let's
overturns
not,
it.
guys, let's not, I appreciate the conversation, but we're kind of going down the path of campaign finance reform rather than Supreme Court justices. So I want to stay on topic. I agree it's important. We actually did talk about Citizens United another night. It was a long time ago. We could probably revisit it, but we have a lot of stuff on the agenda right now. So I'm just going to suggest let's pause that. And if we run out of questions tonight, let's come back to it. Okay.
Sounds good.
Jeff has his hand up. Go ahead, Jeff.
Would it help if we had more people on in the Supreme Court?
No.
Well, they have in history, they have had more than 9.
Yeah,
Because
but if
is
you
there a
have
way
more
to balance
people,
it better to represent the people? Because right now I think it's represented politically.
right? The problem with that, Gene, is that any mechanism that you use to add more people, the people that you add could be just as corrupt as the ones you have now if you don't solve the root cause, which is the lack of enforcement of the ethics code. So you got to fix the ethics code enforcement. If you fix the ethics code enforcement, you don't necessarily need more people on the Supreme Court. You just need the people that are there to be ethical and the unethical ones to be removed. And if we had the right enforcement mechanism, both of those things would happen.
Yeah, I'd love that, but I mean, we're moving into an oligarchy, and we're losing democracy. I mean, these are big, big, serious things happening. Maybe it's a good thing actually, because our entire government system will be destroyed, and we'll have to start from scratch. Maybe
Unfortunately,
it's
that's not quite how it works. What happens when you move into oligarchy is that you have a dictator, and you don't actually get rebuilt. You actually just have a supreme leader, and everybody has to bow their head to him. And if you say something bad about him, you get sent to the gulags and the camps, to the work
I
camps, to the
yeah.
education
He's
camps.
saying that's how
It-
revolution
That's
happens.
what's happening. Like right now, as I see it,
no,
like
no,
they're gonna come after you. They're starting to. They don't want NPR. They don't want PBS. They
yeah,
just want to control the conversation. And
yeah.
so many people I know here in South Jersey, it's disgusting. I want to move out of here. Are just they're listening to Fox, and they're really just not accepting, looking deeper for the truth. They're it's disturbing. I'm very, very,
Yeah.
And
There's a
I
lot
by the
to
like
be
way,
I
concerned
like your
about.
presentation. I agree
Thank
with your
you.
presentation.
Thank you.
I just think it's a horrible time to be trying to correct this. It's
Yeah,
like,
it's the ancient Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. We live in very interesting times. So,
yeah.
um,
I'd like to join, because I'd like, if there's
please.
any way, you have any influence, I guess it would make me feel good.
Well, we have to recruit people that want to be fair more than follow a party. And if we can recruit people from both the right and the left and say we want to be fair and we want to follow these things like getting money out of politics and we want to do things like making sure that the country is fair for everybody, that's what we want to do. And so,
Okay.
yeah, please do join.
Yeah.
The link that I
and by
put
the
has
way,
a link for membership and you can apply there.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
I disagree with your statement that this issue with the judicial system and the issue with the legislative branch, I mean the political Senate and Congress and all that stuff, they're not separate. The same thing that infects the same disease that infects the big political scene is the thing that spills over into the judicial system. I don't think they're separate.
Who said it was separate?
It sounded like you did,
No,
but
no, I
maybe
didn't
I was
say that.
wrong.
I agree with you. They're all related.
Yeah. All right,
Yeah,
that's fine then. I'm
yeah,
happy.
yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. I agree they're all related. I just am trying to tackle the root causes. Tonight, the
Yeah.
topic is the judicial system, so that's why I'm keeping us on that, not because I'm not passionate about campaign finance. I care more about campaign finance than the judicial system because it's the root cause. And so, yeah. But Jeff, go ahead.
Well, first of all, that was quite a conversation.
Indeed.
Um, and I'm glad that you all contributed all those things rather than Garrett calling on me first, because I was going to say several of those things, and now I don't have to say them. But I want to offer you something here. So, given the situation that we find ourselves in, it's not unlike situations that that I've supported teams of folks in in nonprofits and in for-profits and social enterprises and movements in over the last 3.5 decades. Over 21,000 people have attended programs, intensive week-long experiential leadership programs that I've done across the world in the last 3 decades. And so I just want to offer you one process that if we were all in one place, it would be much easier for us to do. But it includes this. Call it the 5 stories exercise. And the 5 stories are these. One, and the questions are very carefully crafted. What do you think is going on or has just happened? And the reason why it's you think is that the assumption is you don't really know. You don't actually have enough information. You have your vantage point, and your vantage point gives you a certain perspective. And from that perspective, you reach opinions of one kind or another. And they are always, to some extent, inadequately informed and potentially even incorrectly formed, and potentially a subject of a result of your unconscious biases. So, nonetheless, what do you think has just happened or is happening now? We call that the front story. The second is the backstory. What do you think is important to know about how we got here? And that might be any range of different things. You know, what one person thinks is important might be different from what someone else thinks is important. In fact, I guarantee you it is, from having done this with a number of people, even if they're sitting right next to each other in the same room and they see each other every day and they're working for the same enterprise. Third is the future story. And the future story is, so if we could have our way, what's the outcome that we'd like to see? What's, you know, what they call in design work the desiderata? You know, what would be our aspiration? And to some extent, you know, why? What's our most important? What would we hope to gain from generating that particular outcome? So it's not just the hard and fast things. It's really what we would gain if we were able to generate that. So that's the future story. So the front story, the back story, the future story. Now the next story is actually, I think, the most interesting story, which is, we call it the inside story. What's the conversation you're having with yourself about this? You know, what are you saying to yourself? What's the story you're telling to yourself about, you know, your life and the lives around you and people you care about and the country or the world or reincarnation or whatever it is? You know, what's the story you're telling to yourself? What's your self-talk, you know, sometimes. And then so that's the inside story. And then after everybody sharing, you know, those stories, we then are ready for, well, what do you think might be the journey? What's our journey story? What's our path story for how we might get from where we are now to where we'd like to be? And we're only ready really to have that conversation when we've put the other things on the table, and then idea storming what are the criteria by which we might choose what to do, you know, first and then maybe next, and what we'd hope to learn from those things that we would try, recognizing that none of us have the perfect plan, and whatever we do, it might work, it might not, it'll probably work partially. And the real question is, how can we keep learning the best things from our experiences so that we can keep moving forward together? So I just offer you that as a way through this kind of a situation. And it has a little bit more, if you will, discipline to it, as well as a little bit more nuance and fullness to the conversation. And if someday we ever find ourselves in the same room and you'd like to play that game, maybe it's a game we get to play together.
Thank
That's
you,
all.
Jeff. It's a great and powerful series of questions for getting a group of people into an area of consensus. What I would suggest is I would love for you to join as a member, Jeff, if I could, you know, urge you yet again. And we could do that as a group for members of the FTI, because I think that would be a good way of sort of like creating a consensus on what we can do within our power to help address the problems that we're seeing. You know, this is more of like an open educational forum. The FTI members is about, you know, taking action in our lives to help us achieve our life's goals and form positive habits. And so that's really more the place for taking action, although we can do a little bit of it here. We have an ongoing relationship. And so I think we could actually answer all those questions in a small group via Zoom. We would just need to do it in a small group via Zoom so that everybody had a voice. And so I think those would be great questions to ask in a pod, we call them, of FTI members. So
I like that idea.
cool.
Well, and of course, let me not remember to say that no matter what, democracy belongs to those who show up.
I think to make your idea
My
work,
motto now. That's a good
All right,
motto.
let's let Tim go, Gene, and then we'll hear you from you after.
Okay, thank
He
you.
started first. Go ahead, Tim.
thank you, Garrett. I think I like the idea, Jeff, but you need a truly diverse group so that you consider everyone's opinion in order for something like that to work.
I agree.
And I find since a lot of these groups are based in areas that are overwhelmingly to the left, or I live in New York City, and New York City loves to talk about its diversity, but it's not really diverse because they're diverse and they accept things that they already accept and they cut out everything else. New York as an example, no Republicans win. It's a democratically driven state. New York is even more so than the rest of the state. So in order to really use your stories, and I use something similar to that in my company when we're developing new things, you really need to be able to bring everybody's diverse opinion to the table. And I think I see that it isn't truly diverse. And I lived in North Carolina. People thought I was a raging liberal. I moved to New York. People think I'm a raging conservative, which means I'm the last moderate in the country. So I think that's something that
I get that too, Tim. Just so you know, we want to keep to under 20 seconds when it's a reply. So, but I would love for you to join as well, Tim, if you're interested in joining as a member of the FTI. I'm also an independent. I try to decide issue by issue. But these days I obviously, tonight's presentation slanted more towards one than the other, but that's because that's where the facts led me, right? Not because I have a political bias for either side. Gene, you were going to say something earlier.
I just liked democracy is for those who show up.
Yes.
It's like I'm trying not to just be too cynical and give up, and I'd like to do something. So,
Yes.
listening to the other opinions, I agree that you have to be willing to listen. People do label you like people want to say I'm liberal.
Yep.
I was an independent for a long time, and then when Obama came along, I thought, "Oh, yay, yay!" I was really excited, so I became a Democrat. But I feel like I want to be an independent again. But independent, candidates they just can't win because of the money.
Right. Well,
Yeah, yeah.
it's because of
Hey,
lack of force rank voting, to be honest. Like if we had
hey,
force rank voting, independents could win. Sorry, did someone else want to speak up?
I don't know what that is. Maybe I'll have to listen to something more about
I'll
that.
explain it. I'll explain it in a minute, but someone else, it sounded like
Okay.
wanted to talk.
I'm
Okay.
sorry,
Thank you.
Garrett. I
Go
just
ahead,
I just
Jeff.
want Gene, the line is actually democracy belongs to those who show up.
I'm
Nice.
going to write that down. Thank you.
Yes, and I would like all of you to show up because I really like this group, and I want all of you to show up. And if you show up as a member of the FTI, we'll be able to stay in touch and help each other show up for each other in ways more than just about political things, but about helping each other, achieve life goals and form positive habits. So, that said, yeah. So. There's a lot of hands up, so I want to get through M3502's iPhone. You're on mute, by the way. There you go.
Yep. Yeah, I have to figure out how to fix that. It's Michelle. So, It was a great presentation, Garrett. Thank you very much. It was very informative. I could tell you that, I am a Republican, but it did open my eyes because I wasn't really looking, or I haven't really dug into the historical side of the justices, and their gifts, and the whole biasness as far as if they should recuse themselves, or their political biasness towards receiving gifts, and cash, and all that stuff. But um, to your point, I think you are correct, though. It really, people did mention that, yeah, we have Congress, and we have people in the rankings that have obviously taken kickbacks. I mean, I'm sure we could name a bunch off the top of our heads, but I really think it has to start with the Supreme Court, that there should be like a thorough review before they are admitted into being a contender. I don't know, maybe even doing like getting like an independent, like consulting firm, like a review organization, maybe like an outside vendor to like go through their background, pull up all this stuff, and then really adhere to the standards on whether or not, based on their moral character and their grounds, whether or not they should be admitted. But then in the same sense, we implement that. We really need to implement that across the board with members of Congress and Republicans and all the politicians. And I just, in a perfect world, that'd be great. But, whether or not that could actually be done is another story.
Yeah. So actually, you reminded me of something that I somehow managed to not cover, is that there was actually the ability to filibuster, which basically means that let me just mute that person. There was the ability to filibuster. So if you really didn't like a Supreme Court candidate and you were of the minority in the Senate, you could basically just read a really long book, is what the filibuster is. You just get up in Congress, you use lots of time, and you need to spend your time to you need to spend your time to like just read a book and like waste time. And basically it's a way of saying, as a senator, I'm going to basically prevent this vote from happening because I believe so strongly that this person shouldn't become a Supreme Court justice. And better Supreme Court justices were placed before 2017 than after, in my opinion, for the most part. And it's because the Republicans basically said, we're not going to have a filibuster anymore. And so once you have a majority in the Senate, you can put that person on the Supreme Court even without anyone from the other side joining you at all. And so as long as you have a 51 votes, you're good to go. You can put whoever you want on the court, even if they're super unethical, they've taken bribes, they've lied throughout their whole career, it doesn't matter. They could be a convicted felon, it doesn't matter. But you can put them on the Supreme Court if you have 51 votes. And that, I think, is really a bad thing to do, because you're right. There should be a thorough vetting, Michelle. And I think it was Michelle. Yeah, Michelle. And we need a thorough vetting. But really, Congress and the Senate is the one that's supposed to vet them. And the confirmation hearing is where they're supposed to be vetted. But I pointed out a large number of cases where people basically were dishonest in their confirmation hearings, and or they either they were dishonest or they refused to answer a question that should have had an obvious answer, and either one of those should be concerning to us. And so I don't know that, while I'm a big believer in the free markets, Michelle, and I like the idea of having someone sort of dig in deeper and bring to light facts about a potential justice that may not otherwise be uncovered by the Senate. The Senate is supposed to do that job, and there was a way of making sure they did it well, and now it's gone. So, does that make sense, Michelle?
Yeah, it does.
Cool. So hopefully we can get it back. I don't know. I don't know if there's an easy way. I haven't looked into that. But Michael, you have your hand up next.
Oh, this is just a comment on relying on members of Congress to be the ones who monitor ethical conduct. The members of Congress were in private hearings about various industries where they got insider information that allowed them to invest in stocks and bonds and other things that the rest of us did not have that information. When it came to light, there was public outcry, and Congress decided to police itself and made a rule that they could not do that anymore. Well, not too long after that, they rescinded that rule in the dark of night with a voice vote so that no one would know who voted for and who voted against it. So they proved by doing that they're no better.
Well, I'm not saying that Congress is great. Congress's approval ratings, the last time I compared, was actually lower than the approval ratings for polygamy. So that kind of gives you an idea of where Congress's approval ratings are, not so high. And I'm not even against polygamy, but I do think Congress is against. I think as long as everyone is mutually agreeable to their relationship, cool, do whatever you want in your private life. But Congress is doing a bad job. All I was saying is that when there was a filibuster, there was at least a check and balance where you couldn't just ram a candidate through with a simple majority. And so there was a little bit more of a need to choose a candidate that would be more appealing and more like not as politically biased. That was the idea.
Yes, Michael, if you invested in Nancy Pelosi's portfolio, you would have hit the jackpot. And still people are doing that.
I have no doubt.
Is her portfolio public, Abe?
Yeah. She buys all options and futures and puts, and you look at the strategy, wow, she had to have insider information.
Yeah, well, they do, and it is a known thing that Congress is allowed to trade on insider info, whereas private enterprise that's illegal. And interestingly, if you try to bribe an official of a foreign government, that's illegal. You can't even give them a $75 bottle of whiskey as a local political custom might require you to do to build a relationship with them, but you can give a U.S. politician $100 million as long as you have no quid pro quo and no guarantee or promise, and you don't
Yeah,
get caught.
Garrett, I don't know how I got back. I mean, I was
Yeah, it's
just
your
up.
turn, Abe. It's your turn.
Yeah.
When you talk, Abe, just so everybody knows, if your hand is up and you talk, Zoom will put a little message up that says, "Are you finished talking?" And if you don't say, "No, I'm not finished talking," it will put your hand down. So that's what happened to you, Abe.
Okay.
So go ahead.
Talking about the Supreme Court, I mean, as a solution, I don't understand why we don't have any term limits. Every other country has term limits as to the number of years, term and age limits. I
Right.
mean, look at what happened to Biden. I mean, after a certain stage, these people become really a little bit senile. And I don't think that thinking capability is all that great. I think we have to have term limits, even on our congressmen and senators and everybody, term limits and age limits.
Abe, I recommend going back and watching an objective review of Biden's public FaceTime during the time he was called senile, and you could even watch him now. Like the only views that I saw of Biden supposedly being senile were cherry picked videos of specific times where he was stuttering or had a speech for words or misspoke, and they were talking over him saying how senile he was. It definitely got repeated so much that he was senile that it impacted voters' opinions of him, but I didn't see objective evidence that he was senile or in decline.
I saw the debate, and at that time I really thought, wow, is this the person we are selecting to be the president?
I don't know. Yeah. So
Everybody throws that up though because Biden fell apart. Doesn't mean everybody who's older is incapable. We've had many older people leading the country, being Supreme Court justices in the past. They were fine.
Yeah, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was very old and she was pretty sharp all the way to the end.
Yes.
She died, but she
Yeah,
was
but
very sharp
look
all
what
the way to
happened
the end.
after a certain stage. I don't think her health gave way. That's why I was talking about age limits for that and
Yeah,
term limits. I
you
mean,
know,
after some time, you just get comfortable in your position. I mean, nothing comes new. After a certain stage, move on. Let somebody else come in,
yeah,
and you
I
can't.
hear what you're saying, Abe, but none of the concerns that I presented about tonight were had anything to do with age limits or senility. It was all things that decisions people made while they were young, fresh, perfectly fine thinking, very clear thinking. They just made unethical decisions. I would argue we should be more worried about people's ethics and less worried about how old they are and whether or not they can continue to serve. Because actually, like, we had Justice Breyer step down, right? He said, "Look, I'm going to step down. I'm older. I'm going to let someone new come in." People do that.
Yes, I agree
Actually,
with that.
the
But
data,
I'm talking about
no, the
the
scientific
process.
data does not support age versus in fact, the older you are, the wiser you are. There are a certain fraction of old people who have issues, okay, whether it's dementia or whatever, okay, but the large majority don't. And in fact, the large majority of them actually get better. They're more
No, I think you
thoughtful,
got me wrong. I'm
they're
not putting down.
wiser, okay, and they make much better decisions. So
Well,
there's no
Munib, I
correlation.
like to I like to say age is the opportunity to become wise. Some of us take advantage of it and others don't. So it's an opportunity to be wiser. Not everybody that's older is wiser.
I'm not putting down age. What
That's no
I'm
reason to discriminate against
Yeah, I
old.
don't want to keep going on too much. Go ahead, Abe, and respond, but I want
No,
to
what I
let
was
somebody
saying
else.
was, get after a certain stage, you need fresh ideas. I mean, after about 10 years, maybe after about 10 years, get somebody new. Everything changes, the environment changes, everything. We can't, and that's the reason I talked about term limits.
Yeah, I hear what you're saying, Abe. I just, I don't think that term limits is the solution. Like, I'm not saying I'm against it or for it. I don't have an opinion about it, but I'm saying that wouldn't have solved any of the issues that I talked about tonight. I don't think it would have solved one of them, to be honest. Like, all of these things were done within whatever term limits would have been there. They were all done sometimes before the person became, a justice. Like, it wouldn't have solved one of the problems. So, I'm not against term limits, but I just don't think that's going to solve the major problems with the Supreme Court. The major problem is there is no enforcement for the recently enacted ethical code, and no one's been following it. I don't want to say no one. Almost like less than half of the court's been following it. Ozan.
Hi, thank you, Garrett, for the presentation. And I was listening you, and I was confused if I'm listening about the Supreme Court or I'm listening about the Dodge nowadays we're faced with. And the thing is, when I'm looking at that, it's kind of, to me, it's unconstitutional. It looks like, and it's kind of, it's weird to see that it's not getting a very quick response from the politic or the judicial system or any place. And what I see is that he bought Twitter. He's the richest man in the earth, that's called. And plus, he bought Twitter, and the Twitter is the most political platform in the world right now, right? So he bought that, and he got a great advertisement on himself first by under the free speech, and then all of a sudden, the last minute he supported Trump last 6 months or whatever. I don't really follow that, but at that point, after that point, he said, if he cannot win, I will be facing the big destruction in my life. I mean, they're gonna take me down. And to be honest, like last couple of days I had to follow because I wanted to see some of the events going on in the world and what they're talking and doing in action. I was shocked that he is using the Twitter to make a propaganda to spread racism, create a civil unrest in the world, not in the United States only, in Europe and United States basically, mostly. And he is calling DEI, that last week's topic, this is a very bullshit. It's created to by woke culture and is attacking all the freedom of speech in a sense of uh, like respecting the that minorities or different ideas and everything. And he turned into some kind of machine. He's very good at manipulation. He's using his AI probably to repost. I'm following his post and repost. Unbelievable. I'm like, how come he is not in jail right now? Obviously, he's not gonna be because he is powerful. And it is connecting the dots with the talks that we were talking about. The money is making the rules right now, and it is obviously doing it. And it's very worrying to see that because, I mean, I when I came here first, like 8 years ago, the United States, I was tired of already politics in Turkey because I saw that this was not productive to follow politics like 24/7, right? I mean, this is crazy. And it makes you the kind of addicted to that someone's mouth, and you're addicted to see that some powerful figure has to speak for you, and you shut up and listen. So that is a crazy idea. When I came here, I saw people don't even speak anything about their government. I'm like, oh my God, that's amazing. But then it turned into last two terms. It changed so dramatically in the United States. Like people start talking nonstop about politics now, and it is worrying also for me. We are not like when you talk about someone is doing wrong, yeah, but that person is doing that. Like I'm like, oh my God, we are losing the relative talks. Like we cannot talk relatively anymore in the United States. Like when I talk about, hey, did you see this? I mean, did you see that? What are you talking about? I mean, did you see other things? Kind of like a pointing, like weird mechanism. It's
Trying
very
to finish your
dangerous
thought.
and like
That's on.
venomous to like having a biggest platform and let run under the freedom of speech and advertisings all over the place. And I don't know what kind of algorithms they goes under that to push it, the propagandas. I think that's crazy. And I want to comment on that, how we can
Try to
like
finish your
save the
thought.
system,
That's on.
how we can make it better, right? I mean, this has to
Yeah.
get better. I don't
Yeah.
think there is a radical change is possible in any country, and it's not gonna damage or make the country go down, actually. I believe if you do a radical change in any judicial system, it's gonna change the country totally and it's gonna go down, in my opinion. I never seen any successful change like that. It's like you're gonna change this country's religion into Muslim. It's like a crazy idea, right? I mean, I would suggest if there would be like um wall of like you don't
Ozan, I'm
know.
gonna cut you off soon.
Right.
We want each question and comment limit to 2 to 3 minutes. You're well past that now.
Yeah.
There are a bunch of hands up, so I want to get to everyone's hands. So I hear you. I think you covered a wide range of stuff, not as much focused on the Supreme Court. So I agree with a lot of what you said, but I'm not gonna do a lot of commenting back because it wasn't on tonight's topic. But if we want to come back to those things, I'm happy to. So thank you for your comments. George, go ahead.
Yeah, so I think I want to go back to the term limits discussion.
Sure.
Garrett, I agree with you that there should be moral codes in place for any level of government. But my opinion on term limits are that if you have somebody who's very corruptible like Kavanaugh, somebody who can't be converted back, at least you have that hard cutoff of a term limit.
That's true, but you also have the same hard term limit for people like Elena Kagan, who's arguing for enforcement of the ethical code, and she's the only one interestingly that I noticed that I found research that she was researching or pushing for that. And so we don't want her term limit to run out. We want her to get that job done and convince other people to do the same thing. And so term limits are a double-edged sword. I don't think they solve the problem. What we have to do is get rid of people who are unethical. You know, if you look at Kavanaugh, he shouldn't be on the Supreme Court. He lied under oath. There's no reason for him to be on the Supreme Court. In fact, I would argue everyone in my list, all the way up, you know, my final list, and I put the slides in the chat. If you look at the list where I did a summary of each justice, everybody up to Sotomayor, including her, I think should be out, right? Like they should all be gone. Like, and if we get rid of the bad apples, then we'll only have good apples left. But we have to have a mechanism for getting rid of the bad apples, not time them out, right? The way to get rid of a bad apple is to take it out of the barrel before it spoils the bunch. Keep a bad apple in for 18 years, it's going to spoil the bunch. So better to get rid of them rather than to do term limits, in my opinion.
Plus,
Garrett,
George, you said you were a big Bernie Sanders fan. He would have been gone years ago.
For
Term limit.
further to
Right,
what
right.
George was
But
saying,
go ahead.
like, you know, when you have term limits, at least, you know, after a certain stage, you get fresh thinking, fresh ideas. I mean,
I
with
agree
somebody
with that
new
too.
coming in. I mean,
Who-
even with Ketanji Brown Jackson, after some time, you know, you need somebody new after some time, not the
Right.
same old thing. I mean, you need fresh thinking, something from a new perspective.
Yeah,
And
I
I
don't
don't think we
disagree with you about most things, but when you're about interpreting the law, and they're all interpreting a document that's hundreds of years old, so you know it's yes, there's benefits to new blood, but I don't see term limits as necessarily something that unilaterally improves things. I think what we need to do is get moral people in positions of power and remove immoral people from positions of power. If we did just that, we would be in so much better of a world that we wouldn't need term limits because the moral people will know when they need to step down and leave room for new blood. And they won't be egotistical enough to say they're not going to. They're going to say, look, I'm going to leave room for new people. And so I don't think term limits are the answer. And here's the other thing, and I actually used to believe in term limits until a former congressman made this argument at an alumni event, and he basically said, "Look, the lobbyists don't have term limits. So if you make term limits on Congress, what you're essentially doing is you're saying the the people in the political positions of power are only going to have so many years of institutional knowledge." Whereas the lobbyists are going to have more knowledge than them. So now the people that actually know what's going on is the lobbyists. Now the lobbyists are going to get more control over Congress than they already have. And let's face it, they have too much right now. So that was the best argument against term limits that I've heard. I'm generally agnostic to it, but that argument made me against term limits in Congress anyway.
Can I reply to that?
Yeah, please.
You know, when you take the history of the Supreme Court, I mean, things have changed. Like at one stage, like, you know, if you were not a white or Caucasian, or if you were an African American, you couldn't get, or a Chinese for that matter, you couldn't get citizenship. But as years went by, you know, things changed and, you know, things happened. In 1965, Johnson, I mean, it was only people from Eastern Europe who could come. I mean, if you wanted to come from China or come from Africa, it was extremely difficult to come to the US. Things changed. So, I mean, even the Supreme Court has evolved. I mean, you know, the people came up with these laws after some time, they were changed and fresh thinking came into the whole picture. It wasn't it
Try
wasn't
to
one of
finish
those
your thought,
static things.
Abe, because less than 20 seconds for a reply. And
Yeah,
I do want to get
I'm
to
sorry.
Guy because she's had her hand up for a long time, as she said. So thank you, Abe. Guy, go ahead.
Yes, so with the Supreme Court, we actually saw that what Mitch McConnell did, right? He did not want to bring in Garland for the vote, and we have so many gaps in the system. And the same thing with ethics code. It's almost, to me, when I look at the system, it's almost left to the individual if they want to follow these rules or standards. My question, I always keep wondering, right from when Garland was not brought up for a vote, I kept thinking, why isn't there a rule? it will be
Right.
clear if we have rules, even like I'm not for term limits, I'm not against term limits, but I just find it so difficult to give it to somebody to follow their own moral. Mitch McConnell, obviously, he thought that he's doing something morally right. That's why he did not bring Garland for a vote, and so on. There are so many gaps and loopholes, and the same thing with all the justices who get gifts and they don't declare. I'm just like, why, as people, why aren't we asking for it? Why aren't bills addressed to change these laws or add new laws? I don't know. I mean, this has
Yeah.
happened since the last two terms, and the Democrats haven't had the majority. But still, it's just as a country of people with 300 million people, we just should have more ways of saying what we want to do.
Yeah, so Guy, there are rules for these things. What's happening is that they're not being interpreted fairly. So, for example, Supreme Court judges, according to the U.S. Constitution, and the founding fathers thought of this, they just didn't, you know, it's just that people are skirting around the Constitution. And, interestingly, the people who are supposed to be strictly interpreting the Constitution are reimagining the way to interpret it to help fit into their own boundaries. And so the Constitution itself says the judges, both of the Supreme and inferior courts, shall hold their offices during good behavior and shall, as stated times, receive for their services compensation, which shall not be diminished during the continuance of. Anyway, the good behavior. What is good
So,
behavior?
yeah,
Is getting a
exactly.
$2.5 million and then putting that person in front of the court good behavior? Do you think if we could, get a medium to like channel our founding fathers' beliefs, do you think that the founding fathers would say that that's good behavior? I don't think so. But unfortunately, because there's no mechanism for removing them other than impeachment, you have to go to impeachment. And unfortunately, because of partisanship, no one wants to impeach someone of their own party. And so, because it looks bad, right? But somehow it looks better to them to leave a corrupt or dishonest person in power. But what we need to say as voters is if you don't do this, we're going to remove you from your position of power because you're not acting as a good representative of us, the people. And I have mechanisms for doing this over time, but I have to make more money first, and eventually I'll work towards that. Um, but yeah, there are
Can I
rules
can I
for it.
respond for
Yeah,
a
please.
second, maybe? So, okay, so we either, for people who take bribes, good and bad behavior is kind of hard to say. Who People have different opinions of what good is or what bad is. But when you take money and when you don't declare it, that's a clear violation. And
I
in that
agree.
case, we just have to, is the only thing that we can do is impeach. Why can't there be fines? Why can't there be suspensions? I mean, it's just, I think these judges have so much leeway for wrongdoing and not held accountable for any of their actions. I mean, I don't know if I am in that position, will I do that? Maybe, because they have all the room to err the way they want to.
Well, that's why we as citizens getting to choose our who we vote on, we need to vote for people who are fair. And we need to look at the records of the people we're voting for and seeing for the incumbent, who did they vote for in Congress? And I'll tell you, if you follow the money, most people in Congress vote for where the money is because that's what gets them elected.
Yeah,
The donations, that's how they feel, whether it's
yeah,
true or not.
yeah,
And
dark
so,
money and
yeah.
Federalist societies and
And
lobbyists.
unfortunately, Guy, it actually happened even before Dark Money, even before Citizens United. Congress basically ignored 90% of the population. It was only those of us in the top 10% of income earners that congressional races even cared about, or that Congress even cared about when they were passing laws. The opinion something could have, you know, 90% agreement amongst Americans, but if the top 10% didn't agree with it in a majority, it didn't happen. And so that is a travesty. That's not representation of us. And so we need to create a more representative democracy, one that represents the common people. Unfortunately, partisanship has us fighting against each other while all of this is going on. Really, we have a socioeconomic war going on, not a political war. But people are getting people to fight about politics, and instead, the socioeconomic war is being won by the wealthy.
Yeah,
So,
and
go
common
ahead.
people are losing every day. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you.
yeah. And, look, I'm thankful that someone is taking a look at where to cut money in Congress. So I'm like, I have a love-hate relationship with the Department of Government Efficiency. I think they will uncover a lot of inefficiency, and I'm happy to hear that. But then what are they going to do with the money? And are they really going to cut the things that are inefficient? Because I can tell you, um, US aid is not an area of inefficiency. It's someone that helps the most impoverished and the most the people in the most difficult positions around the world. And, just because they felt like there were good benefits in the free markets to using to getting subscriptions for news sources that were liberal, you notice that there were no searches for conservative news sources that are purchased by the government. But I guarantee there are lots of people that are subscribing to Fox News and other conservative sources in the government, but they may not find those people because they may not be looking for them. That's the part that I'm concerned with is the partisanship, not the idea of looking for government efficiency. I love the idea of government efficiency, and I do think someone needs to look for waste, but I think it needs to be done fairly, not in a partisan way where they're just dismantling all funding for the opposing party.
Yeah, and this
Um,
is, and there's no analysis done. They just, I like efficiency. We need to cut this, but just cutting people off without no explanation, it
right.
just seems so random.
And I know a bunch of people in the DC area, and they all say that it's chaos, right? No one knows what's going to happen. No one knows who's going to have a job. There can't be much efficiency going on in the government for people that are supposed to be doing work. They can't be thinking about work right now because they're all worried. They don't know what's going to come next because no one does. No one but Elon does. And I don't even know that Elon knows, to
Yeah,
be
he
honest.
doesn't
I
know
think
that
he's figuring
either.
it out as he goes. So, Tim, you're on mute, Tim.
Whenever there's a turnover from one administration to another, there's chaos. We know that. Secondarily, this is very chaotic because if you're trying to look at the entire US government and the spending, that you have to live many lifetimes to get through that. So they're jumping in, they're picking things. US aid is an example. Republican farmers in Nebraska are now pushing back on some of the cuts they want to make because, of course, they're the people that provide the food and get the money to run their farms. So it's going to work itself out in large part. I won't say it won't totally be partisan, but the government has ways of protecting itself and continuing to do its spend, right? These agencies are set up to make pleas for any change that's going to affect them negatively, to plea out to their participants and get them to chime in to their congressmen. I did want to talk about just one thing. We're kind of off your topic again, Garrett, but
Do you mind if I reply to the last thing? And then if we don't have other hands up, I'm happy to go to off-topic stuff. Is that all
sure,
right?
yeah.
So, yes, there is always a certain level of chaos for the turnover of presidents, but not this level of chaos. It's unlike anything that these people have seen, and I don't think it's normal. Like it's definitely a different level of chaos. Everybody I know that depends on grants, for a couple of weeks they thought they would have no more funding period whatsoever. And then that got turned back because clearly it was untenable what Trump signed into executive order. The point is that the people making these decisions have no idea the implications of the decisions they're making. They're just making decisions without being well informed about the decisions they're making or the implications. That's very dangerous. That's like giving a child, a 5-year-old child a handgun in your house and just saying, oh, he'll figure it out, right? And he may just choose to aim at you and shoot because, well, that would be funny, wouldn't it? It can't be, nothing could go wrong because a 5-year-old child can't imagine killing their own parents. But you know what? That could happen. So, I think this is different. there's nothing in my lifetime that's been anything like this presidency's uh, term. In fact, Trump's last term was not like this either. You know,
Right.
he's also, you said that the government has ways to protect their spend. The government has ways to keep itself nonpartisan, but one of the ways it does that is by not allowing people to get fired. Trump has researched how he can get rid of as many anti-Trump people in the government as possible, and you've seen large numbers of government employee take packages. You can bet those are not Trump supporting government employees. So the truth is, what's that?
This is one thing I will push back on from you. Governments are totally partisan. It's a political job, even if you're not an appointee. I've done work as an example for the state of Tennessee. I've run large projects for the state of New Jersey court system. I'm currently working at NYPA, which is the New York Power Authority. These are all public organizations. They're all partisan people. There are many political people that are working within the organization.
I don't think you understood what I was trying to say. Let me say it a little bit better this time if I can. I'm not saying that no one in government has political opinions. They do. What I'm saying is those political opinions are generally historically diverse, meaning about half of the people are, you know, hired from Republicans and about half are hired from Democrats. And so there's no overwhelming majority. If you're in Tennessee, there's an overwhelming majority of Republicans. But if you're talking about federal, there's no overwhelming majority in federal positions because half the time there are Democrats in power and half the time there are Republicans. And so what I'm saying by nonpartisan is that there's not a clear overwhelming majority of one versus the other. If Trump gets rid of as many non-Republican, really non-Trump supporters in government as possible, and he makes it easy for them to take packages and pays them a lot of not his own money, but of other people's money, of taxpayer money to get rid of them in government, then there will be no one to challenge what Trump does in government left. That's a very good way. And if you read, I have to read a little more in detail, but my understanding is that details the life of another famous politician who failed his first coup attempt, which was Hitler. And I know that people compare Trump to Hitler, but the reason is if you read on the origins of totalitarianism, Hitler's doing a lot of the same stuff that the Nazi Party did. And he's following a playbook. And I don't know that I'm not saying he's doing it consciously, but you know, there are a lot of white supremacists in his camp. So it wouldn't be absolutely crazy to think that he would. If you read Project 2025, which he said he was not associated with and had no relationship with in the campaign, well, now he's put members of the authors of Project 2025 in key positions in government, and he's following like a playbook. He's doing everything that it says to do. So he said one thing when he wanted to get elected, and now he's doing the absolute opposite. And which can you trust more, what someone says or what they do?
Well, you definitely follow what they do. That's more important.
I agree.
However, I don't know that you're going to get a skew to more Republicans running the government by reducing the amount of civil service people. That I don't see the linkage there. Where
So you're saying like if let's say 75% of the FBI is Republican and only 25% is Democrat, you're saying there wouldn't be a skew there?
No, what I'm saying is because of the people that are leaving by their choice or feeling that they're being forced out, you might get more Democrats to leave, say, than Republicans,
Yep.
right? But if your statement was that you thought that the government was 50-50,
Well, historically, the federal government, I think, is roughly close to that. And from the people that I know that worked in government, that was what they said.
So what your outcome is, or your suspected outcome is that 25% of the people in government that are all Democratic are going to leave and there'll be a skew.
No, not 25%, but if 12.5% leave and 12.5% Republicans replace them, that's a 25% skew.
Okay. And you're thinking no
And actually, it doesn't even need to be that radical of a skew. Even if 5% of Democrats leave And I don't know what percentage are taking packages. I'd have to look that up. That wasn't tonight's topic, so I didn't research it. But it would be an interesting one. We should probably do another event on the impact of, Trump's policies on the skew of government, because that would be an interesting topic.
Yeah, because I'm just saying I don't think that's necessarily been enumerated by anybody, right?
Yeah, that's why I think it would be a good topic. So let's do it.
Well, so the
Yeah,
one
finish your
thing,
thought because we're past 9 o'clock and I really have to put my daughter to bed. So
yeah,
finish your thought and then I'll let George go and then we're going to be done.
okay, it goes back to term limits. There are reasons why the Supreme Court justices were appointed for life, because they didn't want to have any undue influence levered onto the justices. And I know, living in other areas where the judiciary is elected, that's there's more cause for issues to develop there, because they're now political people. They need to get votes. They need to assume positions that are popular with people in their area. In this way, the Supreme Court justices were supposed to be above that. Not that they are, but that's the premise. And so I think it's a good thing not to have too many rules. Now, they shouldn't be crooked, and there should be.
Try to finish your thought. This girl's falling asleep. Sorry.
Should be basic rules, and they should be good actors.
Great. Thank you. I agree 100%. That's the root cause of the problem, in my opinion, is that we have unethical people in the positions of power. So George, so let's get rid of the unethical people. George, go ahead.
Okay. So listening to you guys, I think my opinion on term limits has changed a little bit. Because we're talking about funding and like authoritarian figures like Trump showing up. The courts have a lot of power to stop these people. And if you appoint people for life who are theoretically above these things, then I could definitely see the argument of, there being no term limits.
Yeah.
So maybe we just need a system to really weed out the unethical, nonpartisan, briberies, all that stuff.
We actually have one. The problem is our Senate is so partisan that they're not using it. It would have been clear like 40 years ago. It would have been so clear that these Supreme Court justices, like more than half of the ones on the Supreme Court, all the top ones that I mentioned in that last slide, they would have all been impeached if they hadn't resigned. So they would have resigned so that they saved themselves being the only Supreme Court justice to be impeached. So now we have so much political partisanship and people are fighting Democrat versus Republican while ignoring the class war going on, that justice is being thrown out and people are saying, I'm going to follow my tribe. And that's where we're going to have an event on tribalism, which I hope you all come to. And I'm going to try to say that we should not be part of the Republican tribe or the Democratic tribe. We should be part of the tribe that wants to be our best self, to seek truth and to be fair. And that's the FTI tribe.
Democracy gets the government it deserves.
Exactly.
If you show up.
If you show up. Well, we want to have more people showing up, and we want to, have a better set of representatives than we have today. And I think there are a few good ones, but there are a lot of really bad ones. So that said, I want to thank. There are a lot of really good people on this event, so I want to thank all of you for showing up tonight, because this is the first step of showing up. Then let's continue it, and please look at the link about being a member of the FTI. Consider joining, or at least applying to join. You have to be accepted to get in, and you'll be asked questions about the FTI's 5 values, which are the 5 intentions. There are more than 5, but we group them into 5 categories called the 5 intentions. And I'd love to see some of you applying, and I would love to see some of you at next week's event. It's going to be a Socrates Cafe, so the event topic will be chosen the night of. So thanks again, everybody.
Oh, wait, Garrett.
Yeah.
I just want to thank your guest host for joining us.
That was you, Aaliyah.
Yes. Yes, beautiful.
Can you
Good
wave
night.
goodbye?
Good night, Garrett. Thank you again.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good night.